Hi there, Demonic here. Welcome to the tutorial for Eddie, a Force Elite custom map editor based on Unreal Engine 4. In this tutorial, I will be covering how to add ladders to your map subject. And as you can see, for the purpose of this demonstration, I have 3 buildings of various heights. I'm going to show you how to set up your ladders for each of the buildings in the most simplest way possible, after which we'll go into more detail for advanced users. So to start off with, we're going to navigate to our Collections tab in our content browsers and click on Functional. Next, we're going to select BP_ladder_1 and drag it into our level. We're going to rotate this so that the white line faces outward of the building. Position the ladder to the edge of the building. We can then lower the ladder into the ground just so that the tip of the ladder is slightly above the platform the player is going to be climbing to. After you're happy with the position of your ladder, the next important step is to click on the ladder, look into the details panel. There is a component list. Click on the LadderClimbEndTriggerComponent from the list and simply drag the box upwards so that the pivot point matches with the floor, ground or landscape. After making gameplay defining changes, always make sure to test your changes before the players have the chance to test it for you. By testing frequently, we can increase the quality of your level's end product. We can then repeat the same process for various high buildings, just like it's shown on the screen right now. But, for example, what if you wanted an even longer ladder, or a different ladder type to fit your scene visually? Or what if you wanted to use a shorter ladder in a tight building where you cannot simply drag it into the landscape or ground as it might affect multiple floors? So now I will go in depth about how the ladder blueprint works, so that you can use this knowledge alongside some examples I've prepared to show you. Certain situations where the default ladder setup is simply not enough. So to start off with the explanations, first click on the ladder and go into the details panel. Expand the Components tab by dragging the handle. As you can see, the ladder has a lot of components. The first component we're going to be looking at is the LadderCollisionComponent. It's responsible for attaching the player to the ladder. It is important for this to never be scaled as it's a parent of other components, and it will always be in the center of the ladder blueprint, and you can change the length of it. You can change the length of it by clicking on the component and the details panel under shape. You can also change the box extent parameters there too. Next, we've got the mesh component, which holds the information on your asset. This is where we can drag in another static mesh to use and other materials if need be. This is where we have visual control over what the player sees as a ladder. For example, whether it's metal or wood, whether it's a long ladder or a short ladder, and so on. Under the mesh component, we've got the LadderClimbDown. This trigger volume is responsible for accessing the game data to attach to the ladder and start climbing down. Make sure that this component is always positioned at the top of the ladder's ruler. That is the long box at the top of the ladder. Under LadderClimbDown, we've got LadderClimbEnd, which is a trigger volume responsible for letting the game know that the player is at the point to where it can detach the player from the ladder safely. The trigger volume should be positioned at the bottom of the ground, floor, or landscape in your level. Under LadderClimbEnd, we've got a ClimbDirectionArrow name component. This arrow is responsible for letting the game know which direction to face the player in while attaching the player to climb. First thing I'm going to say is that with any arrow components in the ladder, it is highly advised not to modify them in any way or form, as it may break your ladder mechanics on the level. Next, under that, we've got the spline component. Splines work a bit differently. You'll want to make sure that the origin position is at the bottom of the ground, floor or landscape. After moving into the bottom of the landscape, you'll notice that it extends way too far into the sky. Click on the little spline point at the top, and once we selected it, move it down to the top of the LadderCollisionComponent. Under the spline component, we've got the UpDirectionArrow. This arrow is responsible for letting the game code know which way is up and which way is down. UpDirection for player arrow and GoOutDirectionArrows are responsible for letting the game code know which direction to move the player upon exiting the ladder and attaching to climb up or down. As usual with any arrow components, best advice is not to touch them. GoOutDirectionArrow specifically always must face inside the ladder at a 45-degree angle, as it boosts the player character at the angle when the character reaches the top point. Lastly, we've got the LadderUpEndTriggerComponent that's responsible for letting the game know when should it start the climbing up animation before detaching the player afterwards from the ladder. This should be placed at the top of the ladder's static mesh, where the LadderCollisionComponent ends, and at the height of the end point for the spline component. To finish this tutorial off, I'm going to very quickly run you through a long ladder example with two different methods, using an extremely tall structure where the default ladder is not useful at all. First thing we do is increase the length of the ladder using the LadderCollisionComponent box extend parameter, and then next we're going to be replacing the mesh asset with a ladder to heaven as is named. I simply position the mesh on top of the asset so that it aligns with the top of the LadderCollisionComponent. Once that's done, we always need to remember to move the LadderClimbEndTriggerComponent down to where the bottom of the ladder for the player is. Finally, we adjust the spline component by moving the spline down to the bottom of the LadderCollisionComponent. Click on the top point and drag it up to the top of the LadderCollisionComponent so that the final result should look like a long white line facing outward of the building. In the second method, to give us more control over the mesh, we're going to use a smaller ladder, copy paste the component and then drag the new copy of the ladder we've got in the component list and drag it over the inherited mesh component. This is going to parent it to that component, which means that whenever we'll use the original mesh component, the copies are going to move with it. We can then repeat this for as long as we want. I hope you have found this rather detailed tutorial helpful and not too overwhelming. We'll continue to respond to your questions about Eddie and the official Discord linked in the description down below, and help you by continuing to create new tutorials. Thank you for watching and listening. Until next time.